The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have filled some more of their coaching vacancies, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, your host of Locked On Bucs, credentialed member of the media as SB Nation's BucsNation.com deputy editor. I am here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is by becoming a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, and just general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Head to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Insider mailbag and some interesting stuff from Baker Mayfield caught on a hot mic. That is coming up in a little bit. But first, let's talk about some of these coaching vacancies that have now been filled. So, following the hiring of Liam Coen as offensive coordinator, the Buccaneers continued working on filling out their coaching staff. First, former Rams and Saints offensive line coach Kevin Carberry is joining the Bucs as their new O-line coach, and then the Bucs are hiring Thomas McGoy as their special teams coordinator. Now, let's start with Kevin Carberry, who I mentioned shortly after the hiring of Liam Coen, and said that he likely wouldn't be the guy, having just been hired by the Saints. But apparently I was wrong. It happens every once in a while. Maybe screen record that because you won't hear me say it very often. But Carberry and Coen worked together in Los Angeles in 2022 while he was serving as offensive line coach. But Carberry has been coaching since 2007 when he was the defensive coordinator and special teams coach for St. Ignatius College Prep in Illinois. From there, he was a grad assistant at Kansas, defensive end coach at Stephen F. Austin from 2012 to 13, the Dallas Cowboys offensive assistant from 2014 to 15, Washington Commanders assistant offensive line coach from 2016 to 17, Stanford's run game coordinator and offensive line coach from 2018 to 2020, then with the Rams in 21 and 22, then last year with the New Orleans Saints. Now, it would make sense with his experience that Carberry may also be tagged as the run game coordinator, or at the very least, be one of the leading candidates to take that job. Based on Coen's comments about needing that balance between run and pass and his excitement to work with Rachaad White, that he's going to have a run game coordinator on his staff. I do think that ends up being a position he does end up filling. With Carberry having done that at Stanford, plus being the offensive line coach, that may be the guy that Coen is going to trust with the responsibility of being a run game coordinator. Again, it's not a slam dunk, but I would certainly think that among the few candidates that would take that job, Carberry is certainly going to be one of those guys that Coen's going to look to trust with the job. Now for McGoy, I spoke about him on Tuesday's episode, but just to recap real quick for those that may not have seen it, he's been coaching since 1998 and has worked for the University of Houston, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Denver Broncos, the New York Giants, LSU, the New York Jets, the San Francisco 49ers, the Carolina Panthers, and then back to the New York Giants, where he has been since 2018. Over the span of 2018 to 23, the Giants were 6th in the NFL in field goal percentage, 5th in kickoff return average, and 9th in opponent punt return average. The biggest thing for me when it comes to the hiring of McGoy as the special teams coordinator is to find some way to spark the punt return unit. I'm not worried about kick returns. I mentioned that on Tuesday when we were talking about some of the special teams coordinator candidates. More often than not in the NFL anymore, kickoffs are going to be touchbacks. It just ends up being better for the offense for these kickoffs to be touchbacks and start at the 25-yard line rather than trying to return it. There are those situations where kickers leave it short on purpose, trying to set the offense back behind the sticks, behind that 25-yard line. But chances are you're going to see more touchbacks than anything else in any given game. What the Buccaneers need is someone to get them better production in the punt return game. Maybe it's moving away from Devin Tompkins as the guy, or maybe it's an entirely new approach. But as long as McGoy can keep McLaughlin and Camarda on the same level where they were last season, Camarda had his issues over the span of a couple of games, but by and large was still one of the best and most reliable punters in the National Football League. But as long as he can keep those guys on the same level where they were and find better production on the punt return team, this hire is going to be really, really good for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, this guy isn't keeping the special teams coordinator job for, 6 seasons, 5 years, 6 seasons with the New York Giants if he isn't good at what he does. Now, they had other candidates. One was the special teams coordinator from the Tennessee Titans. One was the special teams coordinator from the New Orleans Saints. And I apologize, I don't remember their names off the top of my head. But Thomas McGoy was one of the guys that I spoke at length about on Tuesday. So if you want, go back, check that out. I also had a great interview with Tristan Ferris of A Sea of Blue, the SB Nation page covering the University of Kentucky, about the hire of Liam Coen. If you didn't catch that, go back, check it out. Some great stuff from Tristan. And again, I appreciate him jumping on the show. I'm going to jump in the chat real quick before we hit our first break. G Vegas in the chat. With all the interviews here in Vegas, it seems like, or with all the Baker interviews, my apologies, here in Vegas, it seems like he will choose the Bucs. I am going to talk about that coming up in just a little bit. And then G Vegas again in the chat saying Armstrong, meaning Keith Armstrong, the special teams coordinator that just retired for the Buccaneers. He says Armstrong wasn't the greatest, so anything should be an improvement, one would hope. I don't dislike the job that Keith Armstrong did. I feel like while he was in Tampa, you had a solid punt game. You had a solid kicking game between McLaughlin and Suckup over the past couple of years. And then the kick return game, you kind of throw it out the window because of all those touchbacks and teams opting to start at the 25. I think the biggest place where you're going to find improvement is in the punt returns. Hopefully he can get something going there. But I didn't think that Armstrong did a poor job by any means. But there is certainly room for improvement there. Punt returns, punt coverage, and probably those rare occasions on kick coverage. He needs to have those guys raring and ready to go. So a couple of things to look for on improvements. But again, I thought Keith Armstrong did a good enough job for what he was tasked with. Joe in the chat says, "Hey, James." Hey, Joe. How you doing? I hope all things are going well. Timothy says, "Heck yeah, live at lunchtime. Fire the cannons." And Soda Not says, "Time to build the Bakerneers." I do love that. We are going to talk about Baker coming up a little bit later, but coming up next, it's Insider Mailbag time. That is next on a Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. With class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right in to the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes my personal favorite, the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, with room up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability with 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener review every single day. Every dayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. I am going to give you a Super Bowl prep course telling you what to watch for when Super Bowl 58 kicks off. But in the meantime, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Joe in the chat says, let's go. I got the shout out. Much love from Indiana. Joe, where in Indiana are you? I'm going to be in Indiana next weekend for my son's hockey tournament. Curious to know whereabouts in Indiana you are, but we are going to be at the Compton Family Ice Arena, partaking in a hockey tournament there at the University of Notre Dame, my son's dream school, where he is trying very hard to get all of the grades that he needs to be accepted there. But it is mailbag time. Had a couple of good questions roll in from the Locked On Bucs insiders. Again, you can be an insider. Join subtext.com/LockedOnBucs. We're going to start with insider Dave, who asks, besides Baker, who on the Bucs roster does the Coen hire project the best for? And I thought this was a great question because at first, my initial reaction was Chris Godwin. Coen talked a lot about Chris Godwin returning to the slot, kind of taking on that Cooper Kupp role. We know how impactful Cooper Kupp was while Coen was in Los Angeles, and kind of what he can do with Godwin in that offense. But I think the answer is Rachaad White. Lots of talk from Liam Coen about how great of a back Rachaad White is and how excited he is to work with him. And he really stressed the dual threat back that he believes Rachaad White is, which is going to lend itself to the kind of role that we saw Rachaad have in the second half of the season. He started playing really big roles for this Buccaneers offense when they rattled off 6 wins in 7 games. It wasn't just the passing game. It wasn't just the running game. It was the combination of the both, getting Rachaad White into space, whether that was bouncing runs to the outside, getting little dump offs, designed screens for Rachaad. All those different elements added up to allowing Rachaad White to be a playmaker with his legs in open space. And I go back to what I talked about with Evan on WTSP Wednesday. Liam Coen saying it's about playmakers, not plays. Players, not plays, and he wants his players to be playmakers. I think Rachaad White is in for a huge, huge bump in this upcoming offense. And look, Coen is going to make sure that Baker Mayfield has a security blanket built in on every play. More often than not, that security blanket, that safety valve, is going to be Rachaad White. Sometimes it's going to be Cade Otton. It might be Payne Durham. It might be a tight end that's not even on the roster yet. It might be a running back that's not on the roster yet. But the vast majority of those plays of that role is going to be filled by Rachaad White. Also, his hire of Carberry as offensive line coach hopefully lends itself to the offensive line doing a little bit better blocking in the interior to open up lanes for Rachaad, so they don't have to bounce all of these runs to the outside, that Rachaad can get a little bit more production, between, the guard and the center, or between the tackle and guard, really start to try to solidify that offensive line. And again, I don't think the left guard for the 2024 season and beyond is on this roster, but they have to find a way to get that offensive line working better, to open up those lanes and really give Rachaad even more of a chance to make plays with his legs the way he did late last year. Insider Aiden says, if Devin White were willing to take a highly incentive-based prove-it deal with the Bucs, would you advise the front office to do it? Why or why not? That is a really, really interesting question. Shout out to Aiden for that one. For starters, I don't think that this type of deal is anywhere close to entering the mind of Devin White. That dude wants his money and thinks he deserves $100 million. But for the sake of this question, let's put my opinion on that off to the side. And let's say that Devin White is willing to do that he is willing to do an incentive-laden, prove-it deal with the Bucs, that he wants to stay a Buck. He wants to put his money where his mouth is and get one more season in Tampa to prove that he deserves that $100 million deal to stay with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I would tell the front office to say thanks, but no thanks. I think at this point, it is best for both sides to move on. And while Devin White played a pivotal role in the Super Bowl run, after that playoff run, what happened? Where did he go? Where did that Devin White disappear to? Because he would disappear for large stretches of games. He would disappear for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And even an incentive-based prove-it deal would wind up being more expensive than, let's say, a second-round pick or just a day 2 pick, where you could easily get the same level of production as Devin can provide you. And that guy is now locked in to a much lower price for the next 4 years. Now, there's certainly the possibility that Devin leaves and becomes what many of us, myself included, thought he was going to be after that 2020 playoff run, and the Bucs are left looking somewhat foolish. I think you have the same, if not an even higher likelihood, that Devin gets his bag elsewhere and maintains his disappearing acts and basically becomes another Quan Alexander who has bounced around from team to team since he got his big payday from the San Francisco 49ers, who then immediately regretted it and unloaded him as fast as they could. I like Devin. I thought he could have been a really, really special player that had the kind of impact on the defense that Mike Evans has had on the offense. I thought he could have been a Buccaneer for life. Unfortunately, that hasn't really been the case. And it's probably best at this point for both sides to say their thank yous, say their goodbyes, and move on to the next chapter in each of their stories. If that ends up happening, we'll see. If Devin White does come back to the Buccaneers on a shorter deal, or maybe a prove-it deal like Aiden asks about, I hope he balls out. I want him to succeed. I want him to do well. I just wished he had done it more consistently so that this wasn't really even a conversation that we were forced to have. I'm going to jump over into the chat one more time real quick before we hit that break. Let's see. We got HBK Woo saying, can we keep Mike Evans, please? That's the goal. That's the hope. Going to talk a little bit more about Mike Evans here in just a minute. Joe in the chat says, hey, James, speaking of Mike Evans, do you think the Bucs are more or less likely to pay Mike what he wants? The more I think about it, I can only imagine his price will go up in free agency. It's quite possible. It's quite possible that Mike Evans' price is going to continue to go up the closer to that negotiating window that we get to, the closer to the new league year that we get to. So hopefully they can go ahead and get something worked out ahead of time. Joe also says that he's in Fort Wayne. I've gone through Fort Wayne a bajillion times, whether it's on my way to Indianapolis for this stuff, for the combine or for the Bucs playing in Indianapolis or heading over to Indiana for Colts games or whatever. I've been through Fort Wayne quite a few times. And last one in the chat, Satanot says, don't forget Chris Godwin. Trust me, no one on this show is going to forget about Chris Godwin anytime soon. But Baker Mayfield got caught on a hot mic and had some interesting things to say. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker dealer. Wrapping things up here on a Thursday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. Real quick in the chat, CC216 says, I agree. I'm glad White was in Tampa, but I feel like it's time for both sides to move on. Some people are going to feel that way. Others are going to think that the Bucs have to absolutely bring him back. We'll continue to talk about free agency as we get closer. Probably going to do a lot of free agent profiles of Bucs pending free agents and reasons they should or should not be back with the team. But Baker Mayfield has been making the media rounds following a career season and a Pro Bowl MVP as we ramp up to the Super Bowl, making his way through Radio Row. And he was on the Rich Eisen show where he talked about taking some of the offensive linemen to the Bahamas to kick back and relax, becoming a father for the first time as his wife is due the very beginning of April. And then, of course, what's next for him in his career? Baker Mayfield said, quote, the first step happened in Tampa hiring the new OC, someone I'm familiar with, great guy. Obviously, a big factor in that was it's the same system that we ran last year, so guys don't have to relearn anything. So just take the next steps and let my agent and those guys negotiate from there. I'm thankful for that place, meaning Tampa. They gave me an opportunity. I would love to stay put. How they run things, how they operate, it allowed me to play free, and it's just all about ball, end quote. But Baker Mayfield was also caught on a hot mic at the Up and Adams show when talking to Steve Young, mentioning getting some pieces back and settling in there. He has also talked about how much he wants Mike Evans to be back and is really pounding the table every opportunity that he gets that Mike Evans deserves to be a Buck for life, and talked about how both of them have spoken about how much they want to reunite in Tampa. I say all of that to say this. Baker Mayfield is your quarterback for 2024. I have reached the point now where I can't see a road where Baker Mayfield is not back in Tampa in 2024. And I've looked at this a couple of different ways now. If Baker Mayfield were to leave, the Buccaneers are in a bad way. And what I mean by that is, outside of Baker, I guess you could talk about Kirk Cousins, but he's coming off of a major injury, probably isn't going to be ready for training camp. I think Kirk Cousins' best opportunity is to just go ahead and stay in Minnesota. But outside of Baker Mayfield, you don't have a starting caliber quarterback that you can go out and sign. There isn't a guy that you can nab on a prove-it deal like you did with Baker last year and have a viable starting quarterback. Your next option is Kyle Trask as the starter. It's not going to work. I'm telling you right now, I have seen it with my own eyes, and as much as Florida Gator fans love Kyle Trask, or the Baker haters love Kyle Trask starting for the Buccaneers is going to net you maybe 5 wins. Maybe. I like Kyle. He is a wonderfully nice human being, but he is a backup quarterback in the NFL. He is not a starter. Then you look at the draft options. Who are the Bucs going to be able to get at 26 that is a plug and play day one starter? You might see Penix drop all the way to 26, but I'm telling you right now, and if David was still on the show, he would back me up 100%. Penix is not a plug and play day one starter. Penix is a guy that has a relatively high ceiling, but he has got deep floor. And he's the kind of guy that needs to go to a situation where they have an established start. The New York Jets are a optimal place for Michael Penix to go. Aaron Rodgers knows he's not playing a lot of football, after next year. He may have 2 years left in him. And if he suffers another injury like he did this year, he's probably done. Michael Penix needs to go to a situation where he can sit for 1 or 2 years minimum. Learn, get his mind to work faster, because that was the biggest problem that I saw with Penix. He was one of the worst quarterbacks in college football under pressure. And the kind of pressure that he saw against Michigan in the national championship lent itself to a terrible performance. That kind of pressure still isn't as much pressure as he will face on a regular basis on an NFL field. His mind doesn't work fast enough yet. I'm not saying that it never will. I'm saying yet, but he needs that development. So beyond him potentially falling, because Caleb Williams is going, Daniels is probably going high. He's another guy that probably needs to sit. May is going high. So outside of Penix potentially falling to 26, you're going to take JJ McCarthy? You're going to take JJ McCarthy in the first round and plug and play him as a starter? Not going to work. He's not ready either. And as much as people want to talk about how generational, the quarterback class is every single year in the draft, you are at best a coin flip away from a franchise quarterback or a bust. At best, you have a 50-50 shot. And that's even with the number 1 pick. See the Carolina Panthers. So if the Bucs don't bring back Baker Mayfield, it's going to be a very, very long year. And I don't care what the Baker haters say. I don't care what, the doubters say. You saw it last year. He had a career season, a team that was favored to end up with the number 1 pick. They were one of the top 3 favorites to end up with the number 1 pick, played in the divisional round of the playoffs, and were about 3 plays away from a road upset of the Detroit Lions to move on to the conference championship. And they did that with Baker Mayfield. He can play quarterback for this team. He is a starter in the NFL, and the Bucs have to find a way to lock him up. And if they lock him up, they have to lock up Mike Evans. I think those two, even though they won't admit it, I think those two are going to be a package deal. If Mike Evans leaves, Baker Mayfield may start to look for some other options, because as much as he loves Coen, as much as he loves the city and the franchise and all of that, and as great as Chris Godwin is, Chris Godwin can be a 1. But you have no 2, you have no 3, you have borderline 4 and 5. And that passing game is going to suffer tremendously if Mike Evans isn't out there. So I have gone from 99 or from 95-ish% to 99.99%. I am 100% confident now Baker Mayfield is the starting quarterback for the Buccaneers in 2024 and probably beyond. Before we get out of here, I'm going to jump in the chat one more time. I had to hop on that soapbox there for just a minute. Make It All Gaming says, I agree. I would love for Baker to take that team-friendly deal and keep Mike. I think that's a very strong likelihood. The thing about Baker that a lot of people either don't understand or never even really knew, he's all about the loyalty. He's all about the, the camaraderie. He's not about the biggest paycheck. And he's also about longevity. And if he can get 3 or 4 years with the Buccaneers, I can tell you he would be willing to take less than he could get from another team if it meant Mike stays. And I truly, truly believe that, knowing the kind of person that Baker Mayfield is, he will value years over the most money he could possibly get, because they're trying to continue to keep this thing going in Tampa. They're trying to continue being a contender. And he knows they're not going to be able to do that if he is taking Patrick Mahomes money or Joe Burrow money. And I'm not saying he's going to get the kind of money that they will, but if it's the difference between $35 million and $27 million, he'll take the $27 million to make sure that Mike gets his, and that they're able to try to continue competing and continue fighting for these division titles and work their way towards a conference championship, maybe even a Super Bowl. San Anto Gato says he's more about winning. Absolutely. Baker wants to win because that chip on his shoulder is huge, and he wants to show everyone that he can win in this league. Especially, he wants to prove that to the Cleveland Browns. With that, I'm going to bid you all a fair adieu. Again, make sure you're coming back tomorrow. I'm going to give you a Buccaneers-focused Super Bowl primer. You're going to watch it anyway. You might as well watch it from the lens of a Buccaneers fan. In the meantime, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow along on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs, and become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.